we get all of our speakers back in the room, we will kick off our panel discussion. Thank you, Hugo. I appreciate you coming in hot, straight off the back of your talk, and we'll give you a little bit of a rest. Don't worry, we won't come straight to you for an answer, but there are some great questions that we would like to be asking across all the different topics that we have spoken about today. So I'll come to all of you individually when we are ready for your talks. We're just waiting for Didier to arrive on the video, but we will jump around those different topics. We've had some fantastic sessions already, particularly kicking off with Joel's was that creative inspiration, going through all the governance, going through management, responsibility, shared access, of course, all the different design system elements. All right, let's get into our questions, shall we? So question one, the big meaty question of the hour, and I'll be coming to Didier first for an answer on this one. Is a design system a product or a service?
Okay, so it basically needs to be both. When we started our design system projects, we already found 6 what we would call them local design system, and they were all lacking in terms of packaging, support, and service. And I think that's what makes a difference with this local initiative and a design system. If you want your design system to be a product, it needs to come with the service around it. So package, documentation, support, training, and so forth.
Just on that topic, I'm presuming that in order for these 6 systems to effectively become successful, you need really, really extensive planning and ultimately budgeting to make that successful. How would you go around that?
So we, first of all, I think quickly each of the local initiative realized that they didn't have the resource to build, the proper thing. So I think we converted a good deal of them like that. We did an analysis of what was in there also to see what we could maybe reuse. So we use analytics and some data just to be objective and not saying we're going to do better than you. We said, okay, this is what you cover, this is the components you have, the overlap between this local initiative, and basically put that in common to say this is the target of the first release of our Thales design system. And we also ambition to improve accessibility, which is not covered in any of you. And so we use this data also to drive and be as more objective in a certain way.
Obviously, if you can, I would love to learn a little bit more about how you actually went about collecting that data. What were the sources? Yes. How did you manage that?
Yes, sure. Oh, you want to know now?
Oh, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, yes. So there are stuff, you can basically quantify, counting the components and so forth. Then we laid out in a very visual, graphical way all the design system on big posters on the wall. We defined simple rules, in terms of completeness, what we would call good design. And then do we have documentation? Do we have implementation associated with it? In which framework? And so, when you do that systematically, you get data points, and at the end you start to compare and put it on one big dashboard, which we use Tableau software. If you know Tableau, it's quite nice for the analytics. So
absolutely. How about you? Is a design system a product or a service?
Yeah, I love this subject. I think it depends on maturity. I think most design systems start out as products and they evolve to become services. Trying to do both at the same time, I think maybe you can feel a little bit like you're trying to run before you can walk. Not to bring it back to my story, I love bringing it back to stories, but if you're at the start trying to sell something, I think focusing on the initial product, focusing on the initial tools that will exist behind that product. And then later on, once there's a bit more adoption, then thinking more holistically about that as a service. I think there's value in that. There's value in prioritizing one over the other at different stages of maturity.
And do you think we run into a potential situation where we're sort of constrained by knowing where we are in that journey and ultimately it becoming neither?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm not sure it can become neither. I think if anything, it's always both at different points, because it's interesting because Didier mentioned you need a service around it to keep the product going. but I also think there is a service in how that product is then used. So, you know, if you go to Tesco, you can either be served by a cashier or you can self-checkout. I think an ideal design system, it's a self-serve type of service. And I think being deliberate about you thinking about the nature of how that service is being provided to its users as well is an area that I think there's a lot of opportunity to think more about when it comes to the service side of it. But my opinion is that it's always a product, that there are always things that need to be iterated on and features that need to be upgraded, etc. So in my view, at its base, it's always a product.
Sure. This is actually probably a nice segue over to Hugo, specifically talking about sort of the stakeholder side, because I know you've just delivered a talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I think from a business perspective, it comes down to how much investment there is. You know, it's those things, as everyone knows, can be a challenge in the early stages. And I think there's a lot of paradigms that, you know, these aren't entirely new problems just only in design. I think DevOps actually, and how that's evolved as a discipline is something that we can lean on to learn a lot from, because they're responsible for helping create great developer experiences. And often, you know, they work on a basis of sort of like a Kanban board where they have tickets that they need to basically provide, you know, improvements to that experience for the developers. And I kind of feel like that maybe the slight difference is that there is like an underlying product rather than just an experience alone that then becomes a part of it. But being able to operate in that way requires you to have dedicated people who are there day to day, and that isn't how those things start out. So I think selling it in as a product initially is how you can get better investment to begin with from the business, because it's a slightly easier buy-in for those stakeholders, because you can set KPIs for a product, right? You can talk, Didier talked about that in his talk about like how you can actually make sure that you are showing improvements through sort of metrics. And that's, you know, for a lot of designers, that's still quite new. The sort of return on investment in design is you know, another one of those topics that's very debated, you know, people have a lot of debate around. So yeah, I guess that's my take.
Sure. And just so you mentioned selling there
Yeah.
response, and I suppose the follow-up question to that is, should designers sell?
I think everyone needs to learn how to do it at some point. If you have the support of a product manager who is really passionate about design systems and you can bring them on the journey, they probably have a lot more experience in this area, and maybe you can learn from them. I think trying to find ways to show that a design system is at its heart a partnership, or, you know, at least a collaborative process, and bringing them on that journey, and not just saying this is something for the preserve of design, really helps to strengthen your skills as a designer to learn, you know, other things like selling.
Exactly. Ultimately, we want to become as rounded as a designer as possible, and selling, marketing, writing, communicating is ultimately doing design without even pushing any pixels. In fact, I think the best designers I know spend less time in a tool and more time writing what they're thinking. So it's all about bringing that sort of rounded perspective when you start to think about your career. We've actually had a question in from the audience, from Anatoly, and this isn't necessarily pointed at anyone, so feel free to jump in if you have any strong feelings about this one. And the question is, what way do you connect OKRs to design system tasks? And I know you just mentioned KPIs, so it's similar realms. It'd be great if anybody's got any perspective on that.
I mean, I can drop my opinion. I don't think there's an easy way right now. I think if you want to have a cadence of directly linking design system related things to OKRs, I think there needs to be a group of people or a person that's involved in doing that. If you think about the nature of doing that with products, it's the same thing. You have a product manager, you have a delivery managers, you have sets of people that link back how the work that has gone into an area is linking back to the broader goals and objectives. And I think there are instances in which, you know, I can't speak for all organizations, but I'm sure there are instances in which designers aspire to do that, to connect those dots, and they will at times do it, but in a sustainable way. I don't think, personally, I don't think I've seen it yet without someone dedicated to that role of connecting those dots and reporting back.
That links nicely back to what you mentioned before about maturity. And ultimately, in order to, well, firstly, we need to sell the idea internally. So we've got the sales idea as a designer. Then we need to sort of think about long-term goals of the design system. How do we know it's successful? And I think adoption is when that becomes sort of the main thing we start to think about. And then you link into what Didier was saying about tracking the metrics and pulling back the numbers. Then you start to build this rounded picture of we've sold it, we're building it, and now it works. Or not, it may not work. But ultimately, if we've got the data points to back that up, we can start to plan a little bit further ahead and understand the success metrics of what we're trying to do from a design systems perspective.
There was one really good example. Oh, sorry, I was just going to dive in on that. There was one really good example. I was just trying to see if I could find the link. Which was really looking at the maintainability of a design system once it was in code. I'll see if I can dig out the link, and I can always share it afterwards in the chat. But it was really looking at basically the kind of monitoring of design systems and looking at the number of instances of a component within the code base and being able to kind of track the usage of things, so you can work out what are the ones that you need to improve on. Like where's like the most usage, and just really having like an incredible kind of visual view representation of that, which I think made, you know, the sort of analytical side of the job a lot easier, but obviously required quite a lot of investment from the engineering team to make sure that that could be monitored.
But it's an incredibly important point, because the design system isn't just a Figma library. A system is end to end. And adoption starts with designers, ends with engineers, and that sort of collaboration and communication across both of those fields or aspects. And the closer we can bring this together, the more adoption we're going to have, and the more successful our design system is going to be. Great. Let's jump on to the next question. And again, another meaty one, but we'll see how we go with this one. I'm going to come to Heldene first for your answer. Should we look at design systems as the vehicle for driving innovation, or does innovation naturally end with a design system?
Yeah, I love this question. I had a friend when I was a kid that I would go to his house just to play. Well, we were good friends too, but I would often go to his house just to play with these Legos. And he had these assortment of different types of Legos. And you know, if you look at a Lego, it's a very sort of, you know, it's a clearly structured thing with a limited number of colors. You kind of, you know, you can't have a Lego, as far as I've seen, a Lego in any color. You kind of have a range of them. But how you can assemble and how you can combine those different pieces of Lego, as we've seen, you know, if you just Google different structures and things that have been put together with Lego, the combinations are almost infinite. And you know, depending on how many Lego pieces you use, you can build life-size things with such small components. And you know, nature is the biggest design system, atoms and particles, etc. But I'm not going to open that can of worms. So yeah, I think saying a design system limits innovation or creativity is like saying Lego does the same, and I don't think that's a plausible argument.
We can thank Mother Nature for our fantastic design systems terminology. I'll definitely be driving that one home. The thing about Lego also, though, I think it's super important to remember, is that it comes with instructions, at least if you want to build something specific. So when we start to think about our systems as Lego pieces in an atomic mindset, in atomic world, provide that documentation. Otherwise, the hard work we put in for our components is almost going to be useless, because no one's going to know how to use them. So really, really nice rounded answer there. Didier, how about you?
I struggle to basically bring this question in my reality in the context of Thales, and I cannot agree with a statement like this, that the design system will drive innovation. You know, the word innovation in companies like ours is a big word. It covers a lot of disciplines: business model, technology, design, and so many other things. And seeing the design system driving that, maybe that doesn't work. Now, when we have design teams in innovation, maybe they will utilize a design system to do some mock-ups, or you know, to use the Legos that we have. or they might invent or create something completely new. When they do, I think the design system is a fantastic way to scale and distribute, the best design you have, the best ideas you have, but it's not the design system driving that, you see. So it's the other way around. I think you have to make sure your innovation and the new ideas and new components get into the design system. Yes, then it's a support for scaling, basically.
With that in mind, do you see innovation rather as a value that everyone buys into, rather than something that lives over with a particular team with a particular set of ideals? Do you think everybody needs to sort of buy into this notion before it can actually be a reality?
If you have innovation rules, I want to see them. I think innovation, for the most part, is a question of attitude, mindset, and culture first. So that's what you want to see. And then after, when you need, again, innovation at scale, you come back to strategy and resource allocation to the teams, and how you basically transfer this innovation in the product development. And we come back to this big governance discussion and so forth. But it all starts with the attitude, mindset in the teams. If you don't have that, you get nowhere.
Do you think it's hard to, let's say you've got an organization and that attitude isn't naturally there across the teams? Is that hard to reset? Or do you have any advice for anybody who needs to go through this process where you need to align the teams to have that innovative mindset by default?
It's a complex topic. You could do another conference on that one. How do you re-engage with your employee and collaborators? I think it would be very sad if your innovation teams are disengaged. That's a good sign for your enterprise. So I think good resource and maybe giving freedom to people, I think, and empowerment is probably a good way to start these things.
Absolutely. Empower the people. Hugo, how about you?
I think a lot of times when people read this question, they think about the constraints of or what they perceive as limitations based on what's in, what the components, what the UI, how it's all made up, how it's constructed together, and those rules are set out for a reason, because they've been tried and tested many times. And I think that's where people think, oh, well, that's going to not lead to innovation. And I think a lot of it is to do with where you operate as a business and what your end goals are trying to achieve. I can say that at Burberry there are times where we don't want to necessarily use a design system. We want to try something that's an entirely new experience, because the goal for that is something very different from what I would classify as regular product design, as in the context of you've got very clear goals of how you want the customer journey to go, and based on previous experience how that can be structured. But when it comes to sort of one-off experiences that are more about creating and generating marketing buzz, yes, of course, it's really important that they're usable, but there might be certain paradigms that you're testing or challenging because they're meant to give something that feels new. And that, in a part of innovation is maybe reinvention or bringing some kind of newness to that conversation, to that experience. So I think that sometimes that's where you kind of need to break the mold. There'll be some elements that might be included in that, but by and large, you're trying to do something entirely different. And then it's also dependent on your audience. And are you able to be responsible for a paradigm shift for a new pattern? Because I think that then comes to, like, if you're a large technology company with millions of customers, you can potentially change something that then changes your pattern internally because you've tried and tested something.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, Hugo, but are you suggesting that design systems can sometimes limit innovation?
Maybe. Sometimes. I think that people shouldn't. I think that if you have compelling reasons to want to diverge from it, I don't think you should be discouraged from doing so. I think it's just equipping designers with the right, almost, I would say, more going back to values, that gives them the ability to argue in favor of why they've broken away from it, rather than trying to say that's automatically wrong and you should only use things that are in the design system.
Sure. And I think ultimately a system of sorts is always going to exist. And even if you're diverging slightly out of the system you already have, you still have your brand values, your tone of voice, your structure that you all sort of buy into as a design team, regardless of the system that you're originally working in. So there can be that flexibility, but as Hugo mentioned, it's also very important sometimes to diverge and to try new things and to test out the landscape of what you have. Great, let's jump on to question 3, shall we? So this is back to governance. We've had an entire talk discussing governance, but who is responsible for design system governance? Hugo, I'll come back to you to start on this one.
Sure. I think that because for some organizations, this is still relatively nascent. It's like hard to determine how the ownership model should best work. Haldane gave some great examples of the different models that you can have for governance, and for us, we try and work towards that sort of more federated approach. We have to sort of beg, borrow, and steal resources where we can to try and make it happen. And you know, that really comes back down to kind of more of who's passionate about it, who wants to see this embedded and brought into the way of working that we currently don't have. I think that you know, if you have people with differing responsibilities, it makes your life a lot easier. So you know, if you can have someone that's abstracted away from the actual doing of the design to actually help make some of the decisions and be able to measure the success of it, it makes your life a lot easier. But when you start out, you're always kind of wearing many hats, I suppose.
With that sort of many hat approach, I think we can all appreciate that designers' job descriptions are getting longer and longer and less specific as we sort of try to do all the things under the sun. Does that mean then to you that design systems, or at least the conceptual side of it, should be baked into all of our job descriptions when we start to think about becoming designers of the future?
I think it's very challenging for people who first start out, because I've read quite a lot on if you are a junior designer joining an organization, if you are only able to work within the constraints of a design system, you never really understand how something came to be. I think having had experience working with them is great, and that will probably become naturally a part of a lot of product designers' toolkits. But you have to be able to also innovate and change the things that are already in there. Those things should be ever evolving. They're not meant to be static based on how customer behaviors change. So it's really important that, yeah, there's sort of evolution as part of that.
Yeah, and I think that we've touched on it a few times, but sort of the guardrails of a system can be super useful for new people onboarding, but at the same time having that flexibility in there to play. Back to the sort of Lego example, specifically when you're working on the early stages of your career, when you want to play and you want to fluff around with new ideas and test things out, I think as sort of design leaders, it's really important to give people that space. Whether it's a quality week or hack week, or 10% of your time you get to test out new ideas within that system, it can ultimately push everything forward and innovate. Back to the sort of previous question that we were working on. Didier, I'm going to come to you next on this one.
Yes, for us, it's a difficult question because, as you've seen in our journey, this is still quite new for us. Currently, the responsibility lies within the design office. So my team. Also, we have a design leadership team. We'd like to distribute more this responsibility to the design leaders we have in the different entities. And then, of course, you have very important stakeholders and partners like the branding directorate or marketing that over time should play a bigger role into this governance. And then I would make a difference between, governance, the evolution, the strategy of the design system, and the contribution model. And the contribution model, I think, is something where we try to be very agile in the beginning, because we started with this hybrid model. We learned about from our Airbus friend Clément, and we immediately jumped on its central team and then decentralized guild, and there we established a set of rules. How can we contribute components and so forth? So it's more the tactical level, and I think that this is where you need to adjust, nearly at a stage at a monthly or quarterly level to make sure that we do the right thing.
Forgive me for being a little bit dramatic, but this all sounds a little scary, that there is all this being defined as we're going along. How do you manage to keep in check your sort of long-term ambitions and the short-term need for actually delivering something?
I think I would be more scared if I had defined very strict rules I didn't want to change for the next 2 years. So I'm quite happy with the fact that we have the space to basically adjust also to the reality of organization, which is really big and you know, fragmented across the world. So it's not like it's easy to initialize a set of rules that will make work. And that's why we want to learn, fail and learn along the way. For the long-term prospect, I think one of the driving elements is that we don't want the design system to be only about digital. So the digital part, this is probably the part where we feel the most confident with Figma as a platform and design system features. I think we get a lot of support. Where we are more anxious is kind of the holistic design, like what Microsoft is doing with the Fluent design system, for example, or you know, Schneider Electric are the kind of companies we're looking at that have design system that covers all the type of products that they have. There, that's the vision, that's the ambition where we want to go. How we'll get there, we're still very anxious to find a path to get there. So that would be my answer.
Great, thank you. Harne?
Yeah, I'm loving everyone's answers, by the way. It's really got me to think. And I was thinking, if we get to the crux of it, I think it's ultimately like to do with change. And I think change needs to be held really closely, particularly in organizations, particularly when there are multiple people involved. If you're changing a system that is shared between people in an entire organization, there needs to be some kind of breadcrumb, some kind of person responsible for managing that change, or people for managing that change. I think a design system can get along without very clearly defined sort of governance, even though there is governance, just not clearly defined. And in my opinion, a loosely defined governance is better than no defined governance. But the moment you need to make significant changes, then it becomes really difficult. It's like you can keep running, and you know, if you think about those the cartoons, probably showing my age now, like the Looney Tunes, when they're running off the cliff, and then it's only when they look down they realize there's no ground anymore. It's kind of like that. You need someone to let you know when to manage the change to a point that you don't lose ground at some point, and it's too late. So I think to summarize, I think design systems can survive without clear governance, but it can't scale and they can't change greatly without it.
I think particularly on that point, with the popularity of design ops as a practice becoming more and more of a recognized need, particularly for more mature systems, do you see that becoming even more of a requirement for design teams scaling in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think similar to a number of organizations, I think you will always have people wearing different caps, depending on the resources and the size of the organization. So I think you will, to some extent, get people that are both contributors to product streams and like design system managers. But I do believe that at larger scales, the role of some kind of, an operations designer of some kind, and we're seeing that in other disciplines as well. Like the research operations is becoming more prominent in the field as a whole. So I think there's broad recognition that operations is more of a key role in any cross-functional discipline throughout the industry.
Yeah, I suppose linking right back to the first question about needing to sell, we're going to have to sell the idea that we need somebody to be managing just the day-to-day and keeping our practices as sort of this well-oiled machine as we're moving through and becoming more and more mature. Even if we're not becoming mature, somebody still needs to look after the day-to-day deliverables of this system that we're trying to build. And that governance, I suppose, when you're sort of starting out and you're a smaller team, is going to be shared. There's no sort of way around that. So from a budgeting perspective, it's quite hard to justify a full-time ops person when you're at a smaller scale. And as you start to build more maturity and maybe more products, maybe you go international, maybe you have localization, somebody needs to be on top of this and treating it just as you would a regular product. I think back to the sort of product service question, the product side of design systems is becoming more and more of a need from a management perspective. And you may even end up with non-designers managing that, and that's totally fine. But that's the sort of way the industry is shifting, that the sort of project management side is becoming more important. Just as I mentioned before, with the best designers spending less time in a design tool, maybe the best designers of the future are spending more time thinking about long-term planning and management. Who knows where we're going to scale. We've hit the end of question 3. I think Hugo's got a follow-up point on that.
I was just going to say, in relation to design ops, I think one of the other aspects, or one of the challenges that we faced, is that previously, when it came to requests related to a need for some product design help or a need for some user research help, we didn't have a central team responsible for that. Now, myself and my colleague kind of take some of that ownership. We have an email address associated with it. So if any of these projects arise where there is kind of need for help from a design resource point of view, then we're there to kind of help assist with that, or we can bring other sort of experts for those particular areas, depending on what the project is. And I think that what that's enabled is it's actually increased the visibility of us as a function within the team. So we're not now just seen solely within the digital department. We're actually working alongside creative media teams with with kind of other IT functions that sit outside of digital. And I think that is it just helps create that funnel, because previously it was like, oh, was there a personal relationship that somebody managed to reach out to? That there wasn't that sort of visibility of who you go to, and design ops kind of acts as that funnel. So I think that's like a massive benefit if you can have that points person to go to that then knows who to sort of bring those people together. And I think my personal experience as a business analyst previously kind of meant that I'd made some of those connections prior to moving into design. So I kind of had a view of stakeholders both inside our department and also external to it. So it gave me an opportunity to kind of bridge and reach out to those people.
Sure. And I've got a sort of bonus question, I suppose, on the back of this one. And we spoke a lot about governance and scale and maturity and decision making, because ultimately somebody has to make those calls. But as designers, we want to become more of a collaborative practice within any organization involving other stakeholders from different departments. How do we actually deliver without being muddled by the confusion of 10 people saying what we should do? I know we've all got the sort of design by committee nightmare whirring around our head. So how do we actually make a call to define when something is ready, or when somebody needs to make a call, and who that captain should be? Floor is open.
Okay, I'll go for it. I think that you're always working with some time constraint, right? And I think you will always have people within your team who are specialists within particular areas. This might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but within a structure of governance of a RACI, you should be able to know who to go fundamentally if there's disagreement or there's too many people trying to make a decision. This person is the person that's accountable ultimately, so they should be the person that makes the decision. So that's more to do with if there's conflicts of opinion. I think when sometimes you're working in those collaborative environments, you have to sort of try and define that up front so that there shouldn't be any skepticism or concern over who should take that decision if a decision hasn't yet been arrived at.
That's nice. I like that we've landed in a position where to make an effective system, we need a system around it to enable us to succeed. And it always comes back to the systems. It always comes back to Mother Nature, as Helen said earlier. Has anybody else got any other points? Because I do have another bonus question if you want to drive ahead on that one. Okay, let's go ahead. So the next question is actually coming from the audience. So we had a question in from Nuno. And this is specifically about releasing of design systems. I guess there's two schools of thought with regards to software, either agile incremental shipping and delivering of ideas and products, or we have the sort of waterfall method where we get probably yearly releases of products. Their question is around this, and how do we approach a design system? Should it be small and iterative, or should it be big chunks of releases? What's your perspective on that one?
I'm gonna jump in. I think there is a relationship with the governance. My bias, which I've not shared so far, is a more diversified governance. Definitely not having a single individual be responsible, because that limits your ability to release and it limits your ability to frequently update a design system. And my theory is that a governance model where there is only one person would mean that a design system gets updated potentially yearly or every 6 months or every quarter. Whereas if you have something that's a bit more diversified and responsibility is a bit more spread across, potentially localized to where those changes are likely to happen in the product, then I believe that you can ship updates to the design system more regularly. So yeah, I think it links back to capacity. I believe the design system should iterate with products, but that's not always the case.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that's a lovely place for us to wrap up this panel discussion. Thank you all for being engaged and your excellent responses to our questions. Now I'm actually going to hand it over to Pierre for our closing thoughts.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our amazing speaker. It was a great discussion. I found it super open, honest. I mean, I love it. And I think I did not lie when I was speaking in my intro about how great this panel was today. So we hope that you have enjoyed this first part of Schema. And this is just the first part. And as you know, nothing great is made alone. We are on this journey all together. We learn with you every day. It's the way we are shaping the future of Figma and the future of the design world. So in the next 12 months, with the Figma team here in London, we want to hear from you. How are you thinking about how you are going to innovate in 22, or should I say, to quote Didier, how we are building the mindset or the innovation culture in our organization? What is the one thing you are going to try to test, to implement? What is the intelligent risk you want to take with your design system? In the next 12 months, as I hope, and hopefully everybody hopes, travel will continue to become more possible. So we want to meet you in your cities, with your local community, and listen what you are working on, how Figma contribute to it, what you think Figma could do more and help you with your design system. We want to learn the one thing that you are committed to try for 22 with your design system. Does it work? What did you learn? And then really fuel all those learnings, all those ideas to our EMEA community to help each of us in our organization to be better in our job and help us ultimately to make design accessible for any professional.